Hi, today we will explain the storyline of the movie titled Armor, which was released in 2024. Well, let's get straight to the story. A group of robbers headed by a middle-aged man named Routt is getting ready to carry out the next action. This band of robbers has been successful several times. With their weapons, they are confident that this time they will succeed too, even though they don't know how tough their opponents will be. On the other hand, James Brody didn't expect his new job as a courier delivering bank cash to have a tragedy involving his son, Casey. That morning, James got ready to lead a recovery meeting for alcoholics and went to work. James Brody himself is a recovering alcoholic who ironically also mentors an Alcoholics Anonymous (AA) group. Before his alcoholism, James was a police officer. The morning after leading an AA meeting, his son Casey picked him up, not knowing that his father had been hiding his addiction for years. Casey thought he had managed to stay alcohol-free for 6 years, whereas James always carried liquor in a thermos and drank it in small sips. Casey works at the same place as his father, a money transfer company called Citadel Security. They were both tasked with moving cash from one bank to another safely, complete with bulletproof vests, pistols, and fireproof steel cars. That day, they were to pick up several crates of cash at a bank supervised by Frank, an impatient manager who often complained about their tardiness. Before leaving for their destination, James made sure that the number of crates to be brought was correct. At that point, James noticed a black van parked across the street. His instinct told him it was watching him, but he didn't want to waste time. They then drove on since the destination was quite far away. However, James was still on guard checking the mirrors to make sure the car was following him or not. Thankfully, the day's work went smoothly. In the car, Casey told him that he was expecting his first child with Sarah. That night, James had dinner with Casey and Sarah. A few days later, James and Casey were scheduled to transfer money from the same bank. Frank was again upset that they were late. As usual, before delivering, James did a double check according to the list in his notes. James realized, at that time the number of crates that had to be carried was one extra, not according to his notes. He tried to mention this to Frank, but Frank didn't seem to care, and instead threatened to report his late performance to James's boss. Inevitably, James accepts the order even though it is against his work rules. In the car, James reminds Casey to always follow protocol, emphasizing that they don't know exactly what's inside the crate. It could be money, it could be prohibited items. So, if there are any discrepancies in the data, it should not be accepted. However, James does not want to get into trouble again and lose his job. He is forced to accept the extra crate and take the blame. On the way, James noticed that the van he saw the other day was following them. He kept an eye on it in the rearview mirror until Casey realized his father had noticed something was wrong. Sure enough, soon the van was speeding behind him, after which the van slammed into James's car from all directions. James tried to drive faster to avoid being chased, but the van caught up with him and continued to close in on James's car. On the other hand, the radio communication in Citadel's car was not working because the signal was blocked. Unable to call for help, they were forced to find their own way to survive the chase. As James entered the East Pearl River Bridge that connects Mississippi and Louisiana, it turned out there were two vans targeting James. Right at the end of the bridge, 3 armed men got out of the first van to block the road, leaving James no choice but to make a U-turn. However, the same situation occurred at the other end of the bridge. The gang, led by Routt, tried to stop James's truck with gunshots, but of course James did not want to stop. Finally, one of them threw a light grenade under the truck, causing it to roll over. This incident left James and Casey in shock, but fortunately the safe and strong frame of the car saved them. James was forced to get out to try and fight back with a gun from his company. Seeing them ready to fight back, the gang continued to fire until a shootout was inevitable. Despite being outnumbered, James and Casey faced the robbers bravely. They managed to counterattack until 2 members of the robbers were killed. However, unfortunately for Casey, he was shot by a steel bullet in the leg. Routt observed the 2 of them getting back into the truck. He knew they had to treat Casey's wound. Unfortunately, there was no first aid kit in the truck, so James was forced to bandage Casey's wound with makeshift equipment. On the other side, the robbers were waiting for them to get out again. With the communication signal hijacked, James couldn't call for police assistance or contact anyone. They paused to plan their next move. Routt suddenly came banging on the truck door and tried to negotiate. Apparently, Routt had found out who they were before. He then asked James to hand over the crate of money so they could go to the hospital immediately. James was not fooled by Routt's words and chose to stay in the car. Routt moved away from the car and thought of another way. A moment later, James tried to analyze why they could experience this. He felt there was something odd about the technical sophistication of the team trying to rob them. According to James, the amount of money in all the crates was not much to be robbed with such intentions, after which he checked the contents of all the crates they were carrying at that time. As it turned out, one additional crate contained 3 gold bars worth millions of dollars. James also found an identity coin that indicated that the gold belonged to the cartel. This discovery made him understand why the robbers were so determined. Routt waited for James's next move, but there was no response. Before long, he had his men rush James and Casey out with the next attack. Suddenly, James's truck was filled with tear gas that stung the eyes and choked the chest. The volume of gas spread around the truck was so much that James and Casey were overwhelmed to prevent the gas from filling their room. James then told Casey to plug the ventilation holes with foam from the crates and anything else that could be used. They did not give up, even though they were coughing with the gas seeping in. James then shouted that his threats didn't deter him. He also told them that he had found the gold they were after. James tried to make them retreat, but Routt said he would attack even worse to get the crates. However, James did not care. Routt then ordered his men to take out a drill to break down the door, but the steel of the car was too thick, so Routt's men took a long time to finish it. Routt's men called Smoke seemed impatient and frustrated with the action this time, as did Echo, who initially thought it was an easy job like before. On the other hand, Casey's wound was inflamed. James needed something that could sterilize Casey's wound so that the infection wouldn't get worse. Casey then joked by saying that alcohol could help at this time. Finally, James honestly said there was vodka in his thermos. This, of course, took Casey by surprise. He felt like he'd been lied to all along. Casey then remembered his childhood, precisely the night he drove with his parents in his father's official police car. At that time, Casey's mother was still alive, and they were on a vacation trip. On the way, James saw a reckless driver on the highway. He activated his police siren to pull over a driver who was traveling at 100 kilometers per hour on a 50 kilometers per hour road. Being off duty, James did not ticket the driver, whose name was Corey, but simply warned him to watch his speed. Shortly after James returned to the car and was ready to continue his journey, a truck hit his car from behind. As a result of this accident, the car was wrecked and Casey's mother died on the spot, while he and James were seriously injured. The incident made Casey hate his father and took a long time to recover and forgive James. But now, he has accepted and reconciled with the situation. The unexpectedness of the situation constantly energized James, who assembled a hook and stick to retrieve the flask of vodka on the driver's seat. From the crack in the door, James managed to retrieve it, drinking some to Casey and some to sterilize the wound. The door to the Citadel security car was finally almost broken, which gave James time to strategize his attack. The idea that came to mind was to make some sort of explosive out of alcohol and rags, however. Casey said that would be suicide. So James looked for another way, but there was no other way. Meanwhile, Casey begs Routt's men to stop drilling into the door, saying he can't take the pain anymore and asks to be taken to the hospital. In fact, it's just a diversion so they don't know James is sneaking out through the emergency exit, ready to activate his manual explosive. Routt then convinced his men to stop drilling and persuaded Casey to open the door. Smoke was sure the boy was just pretending, but Routt wasn't listening. He counted to 3, but Casey didn't open it. At that point, James lit a fire in a rag he had doused with alcohol and threw it directly at the nearest of Routt's men. James then used a taser to attack Smoke, after which he rushed back in through the same door. Echo tried to persuade Casey to give up and not waste his time, but Casey wasn't having any of it. On the other hand, Smoke, who was upset about being attacked with a taser, fired blindly at the glass of James's truck. So upset, he also yelled at Echo and his boss. Routt continues to approach James and Casey in a subtle way by talking to them since they are both stuck. James responded by asking what he wanted. Routt didn't answer clearly, he just gave them time to turn themselves in. Meanwhile, time passed until almost night. The situation in the car was getting hot and sultry. The water supply was only a bottle. However, James and Casey chose to survive. On the other hand, Routt patiently waited. Smoke and Echo didn't know how long to wait. Although this made Smoke secretly grateful that they hadn't been caught until now, he couldn't keep quiet. He came up with the barbaric idea of crashing the truck into the river under the bridge. However, Echo says that's a bad idea. The gold crate will be lost. Smoke dodges and says he can swim out and retrieve it. Echo is fed up with Smoke, but doesn't want to go any further, while Smoke complains that their actions were easier when they were alone with Routt. He also suggested that they just take the gold, however. Routt didn't bother and dismissed Smoke's idea. Routt himself preferred to wait. He thought James and Casey would run out of breath eventually. Smoke, who had an impatient temperament, continued to urge Routt to attack them. However, Routt will stick to his principles, namely getting the gold chest and money without hurting the witnesses, James and Casey, in the slightest. Echo also tried to help convince Smoke there was another way without killing. Smoke was fed up with his two colleagues. He decided to shoot Echo dead and Routt. Now he was free to do his own thing. Soon after, he climbed into the car and pushed James's car into the bridge railing. This caused the gasoline to leak, and Smoke saw the opportunity to fire the explosive. Within seconds, an explosion occurred until James's car plunged into the river. The incident inevitably led to James having to save himself and Casey, however. He was hampered by Casey's leg, which was trapped in the truck. Water seeped in from the emergency exit and further submerged their car. Casey couldn't bear to see his father struggling to lift the heavy metal cage and told James to leave him. Fortunately, thanks to his unyielding efforts, James managed to lift the cage that was pinning Casey's legs and help him out of the emergency exit before the truck completely sank. A moment later, he led Casey swimming to shore. Just at that moment, Smoke appeared to continue beating James. A hand-to-hand fight ensued. James was almost shot dead on the spot, however. He survived. Routt, who was apparently shot in his bulletproof vest, shot Smoke from the bridge. With one shot, Smoke was killed. They then met to negotiate. Routt said he didn't want to fight anymore. He just asked them to let him go and not report him to the police. James and Casey agreed to release Routt. After that, Routt walked away. Not long after, a car picked him up, which turned out to be Frank, the bank manager. On the other side of the bridge, the police managed to track James's position and picked up James and Casey.